Attracting profit. If you are a female founder or business owner, this is for you. I am only opening my calendar in the month of September for one-on-one coaching. It's called Attracting Profit Intensives. You and I are going to be hanging out and showing you how to scale, whether it's personally or professionally, so you can attract more clients, more of what you want, more time, more energy, reverse engineer, both personally and professionally. So you're going to get me in your back pocket. We're going to pull back the curtains. I'm going to share my resources with you. I'm going to save you so much fucking time and money, and we're going to focus on where you want to go and clear those blocks. So attracting profit, one-on-one coaching. If you're interested, head on over to Heather Chauvin, CHAUVIN.com/work with me. HeatherChauvin.com/work with me. This is your time to make magical shit happen very quickly. Attracting profit. Go fill out the application and we'll be in touch. Have you ever found yourself feeling emotionally uncomfortable when you're trying to find more joy? Maybe you're doing this work, and I'm using air quotes, but you're doing this work and you're listening to the podcast. Maybe you're reading these books and you're feeling like you might be failing a little bit. Maybe the last few years have taken a lot out of you. Did you know that you actually might be grieving? In my personal experience, the more I become the person I desire to be on a daily basis, the more I've had to accept that I continuously have to grieve the loss of my old self. My old self, my old life, when my children were younger, missing those times, and also understanding that in every moment of every day, you have the duality of not this, the emotionally uncomfortable feelings. And you can also still create moments of joy, moments of gratitude. And in my personal life, like I mentioned, I have found that the more I choose freedom, the more I choose how I want to feel, I feel those uncomfortable emotions more. And I think this is something that's not talked about a lot, which is why I'm really excited to share with you today Dr. Sherry Walling. She's a friend, a colleague, a clinical psychologist, a speaker, podcaster, author, and a mental health advocate. Her company, Zen Founder, helps entrepreneurs and leaders navigate transition, rapid growth, loss, conflict, or any manner of complex human experiences. And her new book, Touching Two Worlds, is a guide for finding hope in the landscape of loss. And Sherry herself has experienced tremendous loss. And what I love about this book, she talks about it. She talks about it very openly, of the loss of physical people that she loved near and dear to her heart, addiction, all of that. And this is really about, I think, learning how to mourn, learning how to grieve, because traditionally we're taught that grief is the loss of a human, right? Physical person is gone, and then we grieve. But we're not taught to grieve the loss of relationships of people who are still alive, or to grieve the loss of an old identity because we've chosen to transition in a career, or, you know, the loss of children's youth, the loss of understanding maybe who we are. So I see this duality of, if we want to learn how to live, how to feel alive, how to feel energized, we also need to learn how to grieve. So that's what Sherry and I are talking about today. I hope you enjoy. Let me know. Head on over to Instagram at Heather Chauvin. Send me a private message. I want to hear from you.
I see grief everywhere now. Last week, I helped an entrepreneur organize a memorial event for his business. He's shutting it down. We're gathering the employees for a photo slideshow and an exchange of stories and memories. This practice is intended to help everyone say goodbye and to name the heaviness of loss. A little subset of my clinical practice consists of women physicians, specifically surgeons and emergency doctors. Our work together includes lots of topics: parenting, the ups and downs of marriage, sexism, family of origin stuff. But mostly it is grief work. Grief over the moments when they weren't able to help their patients. Grief about the impossible problems they face every day. Grief at not having more time, ability, energy, wisdom, patience. Grief about lost parents and distanced kids. There's a deep vulnerability to grief among those of us who live full lives. Those who pour themselves into creating businesses and meaningful vocations, those who form deep relationships and open themselves to connection with others. The more touch points you have with the world around you, the higher the likelihood that you will encounter grief. The more you hope for, the more you stand to lose. The deeper you love and open-heartedness, the more openings for pain to land. Like light and shadow, fullness and loss are inextricably connected. Grief is a marker of a beautiful, full life.
Thank you. I downloaded your book on Audibles. You have a magical voice, and just listening to you, it feels like your book, Touching Two Worlds, is, you feel not alone, right? This concept of grief, especially in the space of, I know you come through a lot of entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurs are people, and no one talks about this. It's taught, we're talking about how do we make more? How do we scale? How do we grow? How do we go, do? What inspired you to write this book?
So this book is largely me reflecting on the loss of my brother to suicide and my father to cancer. But as I looked around my life, which is full of entrepreneurs and like the movers and shakers, like people who are doing great things in the world, like, which is a very privileged group of people to spend time with. I realized I saw, like I'm articulating in this chapter, sort of grief everywhere, but not named, not honored, not given space to feel and to be, but kind of overrided as like, okay, we got to get back to it. Like, let's keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And so I wanted to tell a story that reflects that there's real depth and beauty in not rolling over grief, but sitting with it, being in it, letting it be a deep and important part of you.
What have you noticed? I'm assuming you've noted, like you kind of stated in the book, but in general, you're paying more attention to it through the writing process. You probably see it all over the place now. Like, oh, that's grief. That's like, how do you see us coping with grief? Or like, how do people shove it away or push it aside? Because I think traditional grief of loss of another human is not even fully accepted, but it's more acceptable rather than the loss of a season in your life or a loss of closing a business or something. So just curious what you're observing, especially those that are perceived as successful.
I think we tend to pathologize those darker emotions, right? Grief is the emotional expression that is the reaction to loss, any kind of loss. But I see it a lot with, mothers who are watching their children graduate from high school, right? It's this wonderful occasion, but it's also loss. It's also this shift in your identity and your relationship. I see it a lot, certainly in business owners, where they have a wonderful key employee who does so well for them, but then takes another position or goes back to grad school. And there's a loss. It's a shift in relationship, shift in identity. And so I think we tend to think of those things as things to overcome.
Mm.
which they are on one end, but the way of overcoming, I think, is really different. And that is that you go in and through, you experience the loss, experience the sadness, give it time and space, rather than assuming that to keep going means to ignore or to suppress or to really sort of cut off those deeper, darker emotions because we see them as threatening and uncomfortable. And I think sometimes we worry that it'll take us over and we'll sort of like be sad forever, which of course is not probably true in most cases.
Emotionally uncomfortable, because if you avoid too long, it's just going to hijack your whole life.
Yeah. And I think you also lose all of the lessons of grief or like the juicy bits.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found that there's a lot of juiciness to it because grief is so bound to love. And so it teaches you a lot about what's important to you and what you value, who you want to be. Like it is an edge state experience that can challenge our assumptions about ourselves and the world and in really beautiful and important ways.
I know last time we were chatting, I want you to talk about this duality of, because we love the all or nothing mindset, but how can you experience grief while still going after the joy, like while still experiencing the joy? Like, what is I don't want to say practical because I hate when people are like, give me practical tips, but can you give us a visual of how we can still grieve and pursue?
Yeah. So the book is called Touching Two Worlds to sort of talk to that or speak to that point. And in my story, the season of these losses for me happened when I was raising kids. I had two 8-year-olds and a 12-year-old as my dad and brother were dying. And so it was very much in the season of like school plays and orchestra concerts and like all the kids stuff. And I think for me, I felt this like whiplash of I would visit or I'd be with my dad while he was receiving chemotherapy. And I would come home and be like, okay, time for violin practice.
Yeah.
And I found it really disjointed at first, but then I was really grateful for it. The more I noticed, okay, I'm stretching my capacity to be in these two emotional realities at one time. And that felt very real and important because it's true. Like I am at one time in the land of grief and sadness and death and loss and sickness, and also very much in the land of making things, building things, writing books, building a career, being present to children. And I guess it's a little bit of like a flip of the time space continuum, but it is totally possible to be in both at once. Mm-hmm. And I think actually most people are, they just don't necessarily articulate it.
I find that interesting. I have found the more I choose, air quotes, freedom, right? Like choosing how I want to feel in my life, the bigger the grief emotions actually get. Like the duality gets bigger. And I don't think anyone talks about that.
Yeah. Because the love is bigger, the risk is bigger, the hope is bigger, the like put all your cards on the table is bigger. Like everything is amplified. And so you have so many more spaces for loss. And so I do feel like that's an important part of like the courage of doing hard things. Like it's the courage of being emotionally uncomfortable is to recognize that it's not when it's not if rather, it's when there's certainty that not everything you hope for and plan and everyone you love is permanent, that there will be loss in our lives. So getting comfortable with that, I think is really important.
What is your perspective on the cycle of grief? Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, tell me what you mean. Do you mean like the stages of grief?
Yeah,
like bargaining?
Yeah, the stages of grief, or if you have like a different model or philosophy, like of course when something happens, like that's traumatic, but I hear people often like years later, it's not the passage of time, right? Time heals all wounds. It's like, no, it comes up and out. So just curious your perspective on the stages and all of that.
Yeah, I think grief is a really interesting sort of time warp because like other big emotional experiences, we can move in and out of it. So one of the beauties of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, which like anger, denial, it's been a lot of like confusion and misattribution around what she meant. But I think the beauty of it, the gift of it, is to identify that grief is way more than sadness, right? It's frantic, it's angry, it's got teeth, and sometimes it's like peaceful and joyful. Like, it's just like kind of an emotional mess, roller coaster. So I think that's a really helpful gift from her framework. But when we talk about grief and time, it looks quite different for most people. But I do think there's an ebb and flow to seasons. So most people experience a sort of resurgence of grief around the 1 year mark. And then on the anniversaries. So that person's birthday, the anniversary of their death, significant dates usually bring about a resurgence of grief. Just like theoretically, like your birthday or Christmas bring about an experience of joy, right? It's a cue, a context cue that has an emotional association. And for some people, that sort of decreases over time. Most people don't stay in the acute stages of grief for a long period, right? Your body sort of relaxes. You integrate this new reality. You reframe your identity and your life around the new information, and it sort of settles in. That doesn't mean that it never hurts again for sure, but there's an ebb and flow, like an increase and decrease that changes over time.
Interesting. How have you noticed people reacting to the book?
It's such an interesting question because it's a very vulnerable book, right? It's very much a lot of my heart and then these like very personal experiences. So as a clinical psychologist, I have all these clients who I've known for years, but they don't know this side of me at all. Because that's not the job. That's not our relationship. So it's been very interesting to talk with them about it because most of them have wanted to talk to me about like, whoa, like this was happening while you were helping me with my divorce or supporting me through my business closure or whatever. So I think that is an interesting conversation. Generally speaking, I think people really respond to the openness and the tenderness that is in the book. I feel like people are often looking for permission to be really open with their trickier, more uncomfortable emotional experiences. And I think that book gives permission. So I think, people have received it well and have been really, really gracious and kind. And I think really are grateful for like the opening to talk about grief a little bit more.
Well, I've noticed because you and I have shared community, right? We met in a community. And so this is my observation, observing people that we both mutually know, sharing it publicly. And this is what I typically see. Someone's like, holds up your book and says, my friend wrote a book, like, go buy it. Mm-hmm. And then they start to talk about it and they start to cry.
Yeah.
And they soften and they're like, by the end, they're like, go buy this book, go buy this book. And what I see is this connection between humans, that although you are always sitting there as the professional, and I'm using air quotes, the one holding capacity, holding space for other people to heal, but the healing and the beauty of just being like, I'm human too. And we're all just trying to figure this out, because I think too often, when you're the one running a company, when you're the doer, you're the responsible one, raising children, doing all the things, you're like, I don't have time for this shit. I don't have time to grieve. I can't feel this, but knowing that it's okay, it can come up and out. So I personally wanted to say thank you for writing this book.
Well, thank you for thanking me. It's really a beautiful process for me to have this story out in the world.
And it's one of those things where it's the type of book you can go back to again and again. And, whether you choose to read it from front to back or just flip it open and read a page and just feel a little less alone. And I always talk about breadcrumbs and following those breadcrumbs, that grief is not, a 6-step process.
Nope.
What do you tell people when they're like, how do I get started? Because again, this isn't the loss of a physical person. This can be a loss of a job, a loss of an identity, a shift in your life. Where do you tell people to start?
I think start by noticing, right? Noticing the pre and post, how it felt when that job or plan or hope was in your life and how it feels now. And you notice the difference. And in that gap is grief, right? What you'd had and what you hoped for and where you are in the midst of loss. And I think finding tenderness and a lot of like self compassion and gentleness in that gap is the work of grief.
I love that. Can you explain, before we wrap up, can you explain how to find tenderness? Like, what does that mean to you?
I think that it's in many ways a body experience, right? It's a softening of the body. So when you're thinking of something, can you like let your body relax into the chair behind you? Can you breathe in such a way that releases any tension in your body? Because that word that you used earlier, I think is a really powerful word. It's softening, tenderness, gentleness. We tend to hold things tightly, especially things that feel out of control. We grip them even more tightly in our emotional lives and in our physical bodies. So sometimes the body can lead the emotion simply by relaxing. Sometimes I'll even take something that represents the thing that was lost, the person that was lost, and sort of cradle it to my chest and rock it back and forth, almost like you would a baby. It's a little bit weird, but it has that effect of really gently, tenderly holding the thing that's lost, which is a little bit of what we're going for.
I would totally do that. And that does not feel weird to me. I have felt, it actually makes me emotional, but in the last few years, the last few years alone, a lot of us have been going through grief. I can feel my oldest is about to leave the house in a year. And I feel I have felt that identity shift, and it has rocked my world more than I ever thought possible. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot to unpack here, and just letting it slowly.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for this, but I will get through it.
We're getting ready. Like you're birthing your grief right now. Like, it's coming.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm watching it unfold. I'm feeling it stir inside.
Yeah.
That's you getting ready for the grieving.
Yeah. Which has brought me to one last thing I want to talk about. How has learning to grieve taught you how to feel alive?
Oh, in so many ways. That really is the outcome. That really is the beautiful side of the shadow of grief, is the sense of really deeply cherishing the moments that I have in my life. I think especially because my grief is born out of these deaths, like the moments that I get to be here on this planet, making this mischief, having this fun, feels so precious because it sounds trite, but it's so real. Like I know they're not guaranteed. I know it viscerally that they're not guaranteed. So every moment that I'm around feels really sticky with delight. Like I just want to soak it up. So yeah, I think reflecting on grief is such a gift because it makes aliveness just feel like this beautiful contrast.
I have found myself lately making my little bucket list and going, why the fuck not? Why not now? Why am I waiting until this happens or that happens? I'm like, that's always that someday when. And then when I choose to act on something, that's where I feel, of course, the fear, whatever comes up, the guilt, the overwhelm. And I have to stop and really sink into, how do I want to feel in this life? But as I continue to grow and say yes, yes, yes to the life I want to live, there's the grief, and then there's the contrast of expectation or who society wants you to be. So we're always feeling all these little planets going around inside of us. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yes. Sherry, I just want to thank you for your time today. Can you please let everyone know where they can get your book and also what else you have coming up, because I'm sure you're doing more talks and things like that.
Yeah. So the book is called Touching Two Worlds, and it is available wherever books are sold. So it should be at your local neighborhood bookstore. It's also, of course, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever there are books. And there's a website called touchingtwoworlds.com, which has some cool backstory, photos, videos, things like that. And I also have a podcast, which is called Zen Founder, which talks about all things related to mental health among entrepreneurs and movers and shakers. And so that's a really fun, freely available resource for folks. I'm on Instagram at Sherry Walling, which is a good place to follow me for info about events or retreats that I'm hosting. I'm doing a couples event in December, a live event in Toronto in September. So there's a lot going on, and probably Instagram's a good spot to learn about all of that.
Perfect. Can you just spell it out? And we'll put it in the show notes as well, your Instagram handle.
It's Sherry Walling, at Sherry Walling.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Sherry.
Thanks so much, Heather. Good to see you.
Are you ready to take back control of your time and energy? But the thought of where to start feels overwhelming. I created something for you. It's called the Energy Finder Quiz. Yep. This quiz takes less than 2 minutes, and it helps you identify where to focus so you can conquer your dreams without feeling like you're failing as a mother. After coaching hundreds of women, helping them reverse engineer how they want to feel in their personal and professional lives, I started to notice 4 hidden skills that women must master in order to create the work-life balance that they crave. So head on over to Heather Chauvin, CHAUVIN.com/life quiz. heatherchauvin.com/life, LIFE quiz, QUIZ, and get started. I even give you specific podcast episodes to listen to based on your Energy Finder quiz results. The goal is to show you where to focus so you can regain your time and energy and become the woman you deeply know you are capable of becoming. heatherchauvin.com/life quiz.